Welcome, Panem, to the glorious reaping of District 12.
Twice the number of tribute, twice the glory. It's time.
The Hunger Games, Sunrise on the Reaping, is positioned as a return to the moral tension and political brutality that defined the original saga, while deliberately reframing the story through a darker, more intimate historical lens. Set decades before Katniss Everdeen ever volunteers, the film explores a Panem that is less polished, more openly cruel, and still experimenting with the Hunger Games as a tool of fear. This chapter is not about rebellion in full bloom, but about the slow corrosion of hope, the normalization of violence, and the personal cost paid by those forced to become symbols long before they understand what symbols are. The tone is more fatalistic, focusing on inevitability rather than uprising, and on how the capital perfects its control by turning suffering into spectacle. At the center of the story is the 50th Hunger Games, known infamously as the Second Quarter Quell, a year when the capital doubles the number of tributes to intensify despair. This single rule change becomes the emotional and structural backbone of the film. By forcing twice as many children into the arena, the capital sends a clear message that mercy is not part of its vocabulary. The story examines how this escalation reshapes district psychology, turning fear into something heavier and more permanent. Unlike later games, where rebellion simmers beneath the surface, this era shows a population still learning how absolute the capital's power truly is. The narrative primarily follows a young Haymitch Abernathy, long before he becomes the sharp-tongued, alcohol-dependent mentor audiences recognize. Here, he is intelligent, observant, and quietly defiant, but also inexperienced and deeply human. His humor exists, but it is unrefined, used more as a coping mechanism than a weapon. The film invests significant time in showing Haymitch's relationships before the games, emphasizing what he stands to lose rather than what he will gain. This emotional groundwork is critical, as it transforms his eventual victory into a tragedy rather than a triumph. Haymitch's reaping is portrayed with deliberate restraint, focusing less on spectacle and more on psychological shock. The announcement of the Quarter Quell twist ripples through the districts, and the film lingers on reactions rather than exposition. Families understand immediately what doubling the tributes means, and the camera treats this realization as a collective wound. Haymitch's selection feels less like fate and more like theft, reinforcing the idea that the capital does not simply punish rebellion, it punishes existence itself. The journey to the capital introduces a version of the city that is still refining its propaganda machine. The excess is present, but not yet fully self-aware. Capital citizens are fascinated by the Quarter Quell, intrigued by its novelty, and disturbingly eager to see how children will adapt to increased carnage. This setting allows the film to explore the early evolution of televised violence, showing how presentation, commentary, and narrative framing are already being used to distance viewers from the reality of death. Haymitch and the other tributes are treated as curiosities rather than people, reinforcing the emotional isolation that defines their experience. Training sequences emphasize chaos rather than strategy. With double the tributes, alliances are unstable, resources are scarce, and paranoia dominates every interaction. Haymitch's intelligence becomes apparent not through physical dominance, but through pattern recognition and environmental awareness. He observes how the capital structures spaces, how mentors speak when they think no one is listening, and how small design choices reveal larger intentions. These details foreshadow the unconventional decisions he will later make in the arena. The film's depiction of the arena is intentionally unforgiving. Nature is not neutral here, it is weaponized. The environment is designed to confuse spatial logic, forcing tributes to constantly reassess where they are and what is safe. Rather than relying on constant action, the arena sequences focus on sustained tension, exhaustion, and moral compromise. Violence is abrupt and often unresolved, denying the audience the catharsis typically associated with action-driven survival stories. Haymitch's survival is not framed as heroic dominance, but as reluctant adaptation. He forms temporary alliances based on necessity, not trust, and each partnership carries an expiration date everyone silently acknowledges. The deaths of other tributes are treated with weight, often occurring off-screen or in moments of quiet, reinforcing the idea that loss in the Hunger Games is not dramatic but numbing. This approach aligns with the film's broader thesis that the Capitol's greatest weapon is not pain, but desensitization. As the games progress, Haymitch begins to understand that winning requires more than survival, it requires performance. He learns when to appear weak, when to appear entertaining, and when to provoke the Capitol's expectations. This realization marks a turning point as he starts using the Capitol's own logic against it, not out of rebellion, but out of desperation. The film is careful to show that this strategy does not empower him emotionally. It fractures him, forcing him to participate in his own exploitation. The climax of the games centers on a controversial and intellectually driven victory, one that exposes a flaw in the Capitol's design rather than overpowering it. This moment is framed less as clever triumph and more as accidental defiance, highlighting how even unintended resistance can threaten authoritarian systems. The Capitol's response is immediate and cold, signaling that survival alone is not enough to earn forgiveness. Winning, in this context, becomes another form of punishment. Following the games, the story shifts into its most emotionally devastating phase. Haymitch's return to District 12 is stripped of celebration, replaced by a hollow pageantry that benefits the Capitol while isolating the victor. The consequences of his actions become clear as the people he loves are targeted, reinforcing the Capitol's policy of collective punishment. These events complete Haymitch's transformation, explaining not just his later cynicism, but his deep-seated guilt and emotional withdrawal. The film also explores the broader political implications of the Second Quarter Quell. Capitol leadership studies the game's outcomes closely, treating human suffering as data. Conversations among officials reveal how each quarter quell is designed not just to punish districts, but to test new methods of control. Sunrise on the Reaping positions this particular games as a prototype, one that informs the more refined oppression seen in later years. From a thematic perspective, the story is about the cost of awareness. Haymitch survives not because he is stronger than others, but because he sees the system clearly, and that clarity becomes a lifelong burden. The film suggests that knowledge without power leads to despair, a message that resonates strongly within the Hunger Games universe. It reframes mentorship in the original films as an act of atonement, driven by the need to prevent others from suffering the same fate. In terms of cast, the focus is on younger incarnations of familiar archetypes rather than established heroes. The central performance rests on the actor portraying Haymitch, who must balance intelligence, vulnerability, and the gradual erosion of hope. Supporting roles include fellow tributes who represent different district survival philosophies, early versions of Capitol officials who later become institutional fixtures, and mentors who themselves are broken remnants of earlier games. Each character exists to reinforce the idea that no one in this system emerges unscarred. The visual approach emphasizes contrast between excess and deprivation. District scenes are muted, textured, and grounded, while Capitol sequences are deliberately artificial, highlighting the growing disconnect between rulers and the ruled. Costume and production design subtly show the capital's evolution, presenting fashion and architecture that are extravagant but not yet grotesque, signaling a society still escalating its indulgence. Regarding release timing, the film is scheduled for 2026, positioning it as a major cinematic event that bridges nostalgia for the original series with a more mature, character-driven narrative. The timing suggests confidence in the franchise's ability to evolve beyond its initial audience, appealing to viewers interested in political allegory and psychological drama as much as spectacle. Trailer material is expected to lean heavily on atmosphere rather than plot revelation. Early footage would likely emphasize the Quarter Quell announcement, fragmented images of the arena, and close-up character moments that communicate dread rather than excitement. Music choices are anticipated to be restrained and ominous, reinforcing the inevitability that defines the story. Rather than selling action, the promotional focus would be on tension, legacy, and the origins of a broken mentor. Overall, The Hunger Games sunrise on the reaping functions as both a standalone tragedy and a foundational chapter for the broader saga. It deepens the mythology by showing how the capital perfects its cruelty and how one victory can echo as a lifetime of consequences. By shifting the lens from revolution to survival under total control, the film reinforces the central truth of the franchise. In Panem, winning the games is never the same as being free.